How does Sony's best TV of 2024, the Bravia 9, compare to the best OLED TVs, the LG G4 and the Samsung S95D? Remember, there is no perfect TV. Every TV has compromises. Beginning with the Bravia 9, that is an LCD TV, but Sony has elevated that technology using 22-bit light control of its mini LED backlight. This gives the LCD TV much more contrast, similar to an OLED TV. Speaking of OLED TVs, the Samsung S95D is the most advanced OLED panel available here today. However, its image processing is not the best. And then we get to the LG G4 with probably one of the best and most advanced processor available. However, its OLED technology is a generation behind. So each TV has their strengths and weaknesses. The question is, how do these strengths and weaknesses affect my use case? We're talking about its most accurate mode, most consistent with the creator's intent, as we challenge them with bright HDR content and deep, dark, difficult shadow detail. No TV will leave unscathed, I promise you. Today's video is brought to you by WhoKeys. Trying to build a PC on a budget but don't know where to buy your Windows software cheaply? WhoKeys to the rescue. Use my coupon code SF20 and immediate discount with a free upgrade to Windows 11. At the bottom of this order where it says code CARD, to the right is the product key you need to activate Windows. So copy this long number, then go to the Windows menu and click on Settings. In the Settings menu at the bottom, select Update and Security. Select Activation, then select Change Product Key, paste what you copied from WhoKeys, click Next, click Activate, and you're done. You can buy Windows 11 Pro or Office 2019 Pro with my discount code SF20. Yes, I've been using WhoKeys for the last several years on my own PC builds and it just works. Just because you're getting the best TV money can buy doesn't mean there are no compromises, just less of them. Before we jump into the visible differences, right, what we see side by side against a reference monitor, I want to talk about the weaknesses that each TV have inherently because of their own panel technologies and what the TV makers are doing to offset those weaknesses, beginning with, well, the oldest technology of this group, LCD TVs, the Bravia 9, and the TCL QM8 51G. Specifically, both TVs are using LCD technology that, in essence, doesn't have the contrast impact, the infinite contrast of OLED TVs. So what they need to do is add more local dimming arrays, better software, and a mini LED backlight to give it the contrast and the pop. So on Sony's Bravia 9, what they've done is created a very advanced backlight mini LED system, specifically 22-bit, better control of individual backlights. On the TCL, what they did is added much more full array local dimming zones to give it more contrast, but the mini LED backlight isn't as advanced as Sony's, right? So each has a different take. The question is, how does that affect the image quality relative to the OLED? Can it compete? Now, on the OLED side, WOLED, the LG G4, they're using the oldest OLED technology out there, the first OLED technology, WOLED, W for white pixel, which means if there's a white light, it needs to be bright. The G4 will nail it because it has MLA technology, which boosts the brightness of that older OLED technology. Now, in boosting all that brightness though, WOLED inherently has less color saturation. As it gets brighter and brighter, normally it loses some of that color, but LG said this year they kind of tweaked that chemistry to make color saturation better and the whole panel a little bit brighter to keep up with the LCD TVs and their mini LED backlight. And then you have the most advanced OLED technology here, the Samsung S95D with QD OLED, which is bright and preserves color at high luminances, but it cannot get as bright as the G4 when we're talking about full panel brightness, white bright, sports, snowy scenes. The S95D can't keep up because it doesn't have an equivalent MLA to make everything brighter, but it's already bright. The question is it bright enough? And the S95D doesn't have the most advanced processor, but does it matter? Its most advanced processor is reserved for the QM900D 8K TV. Again, does it make a difference? That's why we're going to use real content to compare these TVs. And what real content, you may ask? Well, it'll be a combination of movie content that's super bright, as well as YouTube content, thank you Jennifer Gala, that is super duper bright, and shadow detail, because most things you watch aren't always bright, but also how does the shadow detail work? That's also very difficult, and it is the strength of OLED. Can both mini LED TVs compete with the strength of OLED in the shadow detail? How far do they have to go? All will be answered by the end of this video. Now, before jumping into the content, let's talk about the settings really quick. All TVs are put in their most accurate mode to best represent creators' intent. The LG G4 in filmmaker mode, dynamic tone mapping off. The Samsung S95D also in filmmaker mode, tone mapping set to static. On the Bravia 9, its most accurate mode is professional. I set local dimming to medium, but I'll show you what it's like on high as well. We'll talk about the differences between medium and high and why I set it on medium. And tone mapping is set to gradation preferred. The TCL QM8 51G in movie mode, contrast at 90, local contrast on high, and dynamic tone mapping is off. And lastly, I forgot, we have the reference monitor, the Sony 3110, fully calibrated. Let's start with sports motion and low bitrate image processing on YouTube TV. The Sony picture mode will be on vivid, with motion set to auto and cinemotion on high. The G4 will be set to also vivid, so we can match their brightness. How bright can these TVs get? And I'm also going to max out the true motion setting, the highest possible motion resolution, 10 and 10. And on the S95D, I'm going to set it to dynamic mode and motion auto as well. Because YouTube TV is notorious for its sketchy, low bitrate sports, it's a great test. Let's see what happens. So at full speed, look very similar, but let's slow it down a bit. And you'll see that frame by frame, the S95D and the Bravia 9 has a little bit of artifacting around the bright white net, whereas the G4 is a bit smoother there. Also, please ignore the dark shadow on the bottom of the Bravia 9 because I am capturing this in 4K 120, which results in this strange dark band down here. On the other hand, I feel like the Sony has more natural skin tones and richer colors, even if it's in vivid mode. Now comes movie motion, slow panning scenes where stutter is a problem. G4 set to cinematic movement, my preferred setting. S95D in a smoother setting of 5, representing high motion interpolation, full soap opera, right? To see how the G4 and Bravia 9 compare, and the Bravia 9 set to motion flow of 1 cinemotion on auto. Both G4 and Bravia 9 do a great job of minimizing stutter without introducing soap opera. Let's put the G4 on a custom setting of 1, as many purists prefer, and the S95D to my preferred anti-judder setting of 3, which minimizes stutter without too much soap opera effect. All 3 look pretty good. How about the very challenging Lucy, the scene of the cliffs, panning and stuttering like crazy? It feels like the G4 at 1 may have a touch more stutter than the Sony or the Samsung. So moving it to 2, I think works a little bit better. So on the G4, I'll probably have it on 2 more often than not if these are the scenes that bother me. What you've all been waiting for, bright HDR movies that the Bravia 9 was engineered to show off. The movie is alpha, and we'll start by showing the brightest scenes hitting 4000 nits on the reference monitor below. These are the choice bright scenes I've selected, but there are much more of these scenes throughout the movie. The Bravia 9 is easily the brightest TV I've ever had in my studio, but still short. Where the 3110 can hit 4000 nits, the Bravia 9 will do just over 2500 nits in a 10% window. But how does this compare to the brightest OLED TVs money can buy, the Samsung S95D and the LG G4? All 3 TVs are set to the most accurate filmmaker modes for these comparisons. And by lowering my camera exposure, you can see which TV is brighter, more closely matching the reference 3110. Surprisingly, the OLED TVs come out swinging. In this scene, they are very close. By increasing the camera exposure, you can see the contrast black levels and shadow detail, which are the strengths of OLED. Bravia 9 swings right back, matching both OLED TVs as well. This is going to be a close battle. Great scene. Bravia 9 is the brightest. Increasing the camera exposure, you can see how bright that sky gets around the sun. But did you notice how well the S95D saturated the yellow sun? Better than even the Bravia 9. This next scene shows the limits of what OLED TVs can do when the entire scene is too bright. Yes, the sun is bright, but so is the stone head below, and the OLED TVs cannot hit the same level of brightness as the Bravia 9, which more closely matches the reference. I thought this next scene would again trigger the automatic brightness limiter to confound the G4 and the S95D, but it did not. Instead, it was these blinding snow scenes where the entire screen is mostly bright white that the ABL held the OLED TVs back. Although the Bravia 9 hung in there, it too could not keep up with the 3110. It's amazing how close the Bravia 9 matches the OLED strength, that's infinite contrast. However, there is one OLED strength that the Bravia 9 is unlikely to match, which is off-angle contrast. Now in the images here, you'll see that within the scene, it comes very close. Color saturation's there. However, look at this OSD on the bottom. This bright green, ooh. That is the kryptonite of the Bravia 9. Now, when looking directly on angle, I don't notice any of that blooming. It's when I'm off axis that this is obvious, but above that on-screen display. Within the scene, not an issue. Just a touch less contrast. But let's bring in a challenger, another mini LED, which I believe is the giant killer of 2024. The TCL QM8 51G is here. Check out how close it gets. Essentially, it is as bright as the Bravia 9. And better yet, specular highlights, it is indeed brighter. However, there is a cost. That cost is blooming, clouding, and shadow detail. Check it out in these scenes. To match the Bravia 9 brightness, the QM8 is over-brightening the shadow detail in these scenes. So in the brightest scenes, ironically, the QM8 appears a little more flat than the Bravia 9 because its contrast is not as good. Although very bright, the shadow detail is also slightly brighter. So the dynamic range appears to be a touch less than the Bravia 9. But only side by side will you notice this. And why did the QM8 give up shadow detail? For the amazing specular highlights. The Bravia 9 local dimming needs to be set to medium, not high, in order to capture the specular highlights of this hat. But even then, the QM8 is still brighter. But the cost is over-brightened shadows and lifted black bars. The black bars are not perfect in scenes where specular highlights are bright, especially in 1917. Check out the clouding around the image wherever there's a bright area. It can easily be seen on Jennifer Gala's super bright Starfield HDR content. Although the stars are indeed slightly brighter than the Bravia 9, look at how lifted the blacks are in the entire scene. What happens when you keep increasing the brightness of a colorful scene, like what you see here in Jennifer Gala's content? At 4000 nits, the G4 loses color saturation, while the B9 preserves color and gets brighter. The S95D does not lose color saturation, but cannot get brighter, while the QM8 does keep up with the Bravia 9. Look at the blue fingers of the lizard, much deeper on the other three TVs than the G4. This is the weakness of WOLED technology. But again, where are you going to find such bright content? Of course, on YouTube, thanks to Jennifer. All right, conclusion time. The Bravia 9, how good is it? Well, no TV is perfect, as you saw. Let's get those compromises out of the way and address the strengths and then see, weighing the strengths and compromises, is it worth it for me, for you? So starting with probably its biggest weakness, specular highlights. Now, not as bad as I had feared, but here's the thing. Setting the local dimming to medium gives you more of that specular highlight push, but it does not raise the black levels. If you set it to local dimming high, it gets the black level slightly blacker, but then specular highlights does suffer. So I would leave it at medium just because the black levels didn't raise and the shadow detail was phenomenal. And everything else about this TV, I believe, spot on. Blooming, not noticeable. Black bars, better than, arguably, the 900D, which is a phenomenal achievement given how bright it got, and its specular highlights are better than the 900D. Motion processing, spot on. It is the brightest TV with color accurate skin tones in sports mode. That is awesome to me. Now, the TCL QM8, as competitive as it is, it focused all of its strengths on specular highlights. But you saw the compromises, right? In order to get those specular highlights, what happened? There's clouding. As a matter of fact, it lifts the black to get those specular highlights. Shadow details are slightly lifted to hit those specular highlights. And there's no setting to take the specular highlights down in order to get Bravia 9 level shadow detail. So it's do or die on the QM8. If you don't care about shadow detail, you don't watch content where you'll notice that blooming, get the QM8. It's that good, and it's rare, right? Only in those scenes where, let's say, super bright specular highlight, black background, you're going to get lifted blacks, shadow details lifted, blooming is there. Most people will not notice the weakness I mentioned, right? Specular highlights in a dark scene, the lifted, the clouding, right? If you see a lot of that, now you know. Bravia 9 doesn't have that problem. QM8 is indeed a giant killer. It's 1/3 the price. And speaking of prices, before I forget, Value Electronics is having special deals on the Bravia 9, giving you 5% store credit to apply towards a Sony soundbar like the Quad or the Theater Bar 9, or an extended warranty or a calibration. Give Robert Zone a call because I got my Bravia 9 from him. I love the TV. He got it calibrated, sent over, and it's beautiful. Total QC, quality control. He checked it before he sent it. That's why I like buying from Robert. I don't have to open it and go, oh my gosh, it's cracked, send it back. Let me know which of these TVs appeals to you. The G4, the S95D, the Bravia 9, or the QM8 Giant Killer. Until next time, stop the FOMO.